So, Pastor Steve, it's so we're happy. Thank you very much for giving us this opportunity to have this time with you. And I am Gustavo, a small group pastor in my church. Pastor Edson, fala pouquinho.
Ok, não dizer a ele que a gente agradece a essa oportunidade, esse tempo que ele está dedicando para nós, né? E é prazer
for
estar.
This time you're giving us. It's our pleasure.
I'm honored.
Ok. E a gente espera, né, ouvindo um pouco da sua experiência, aprender algumas coisas mais, né, sobre isso.
And through listening to your experience, we hope to learn a lot about the passion you have on small groups.
Há alguns anos atrás, nós lemos o livro do Rick Warren acerca da igreja com propósito e foi muito estimulante conhecer a visão da igreja.
Some years ago, I got to read the book Small Groups with Purpose from Rick Warren. And then it was very encouraging to us to do church the way he used to say in that book.
Ok. E a igreja de vocês é inspiração para a gente.
And your church, the Saddleback Church, is a great inspiration for us here.
Okay.
We are the Presbyterian Independent Church here in Dourados, Mato Grosso do Sul. Is a center-west state in Brazil.
Okay.
In our city here we have 200,000 people.
Wow.
Ok. Bom, eu acho que nós poderíamos começar com uma pergunta, né, Gustavo? Falando assim, que a igreja de Saddleback se tornou muito conhecida aqui no Brasil através do livro Igreja com Propósito, pastor sênior Rick Warren. Agora, o que é ser uma igreja com propósitos? E aquela proposta inicial que o pastor Rick escreveu é a mesma de hoje? Como é que a igreja trabalha isso?
Saddleback Church became a church very known in Brazil through Rick Warren and his book. So talking about Driven Purpose Church. So what is a Driven Purpose Church? You know, and does that beginning vision, the vision you had in the beginning, remains the same, or you have changed some ideas, or have improved it?
No, I mean it has stayed the same. It has always been focused on the 5 verbs, the Great Commission and the Great Commandment, and it's what Jesus prayed in John 17. It's what is modeled to us at the back half of Acts 2 when the church was birthed. And all those themes play out of each one of those 5 verbs: fellowship, discipleship, serving, evangelism, and worship. So for 40 years, a Saddleback Church has stayed focused on building that into the heart of individuals and into the groups that they're a part of.
Oh, thank you. So you remain the same vision, the same idea.
Yep.
Very nice.
Ok. A respeito do pastor Steve, né? Há quanto tempo o pastor atua com grupos pequenos e qual é o desafio de fazer gestão e dessa área? Quantos grupos pequenos a igreja tem e a coordenação dele?
Pastor, we would like to know about for how long have you been working with small groups, and how is being the challenging, you know, of working with small group being to you?
So I have been in ministry since '82, started in 1982, but for about 35 years of my ministry, I've been focused on small groups. The last 22 years have been at Saddleback Church doing small groups. And I guess I would answer your question, instead of what's made it the hardest, I'll flip it to what's made it the easiest. And that is when the church knows what it's trying to produce in a disciple, its end in mind, then it's easy to do small groups because the church understands what it's trying to produce. So if I were in business, once I know the unit of 1, I can replicate it, you know, into thousands. And in the same way, in discipleship, in disciple making when we know what we're trying to produce in a person. So for us, it is, you know, in each heart, we want the 5 verbs of the Great Commission and the Great Commandment. We want authentic fellowship with Christ and with our family and with our small group. We want discipleship. We want spiritual next steps that people know what they're working on. No matter what the title has, I've been a pastor, like I said, since 1982, and I have spiritual next steps that I need to work on. In the area of ministry or serving, how am I gifted and how am I volunteering at the church? An area of evangelism, you know, how is Steve Gladen, who am I bringing to heaven with me? And then in the area of worship, how am I connecting vertically with God in Romans 12:1, as understanding what am I surrendering or sacrificing? So, you know, it is that clarity that helps you make small group ministries so functional and so easy to do.
Mm-hmm. Everyone involved in this vision, you know, the church living this vision is a great thing. It's our passion, and it's what we want for us to, you know. Want to make the question, Pastor?
Por que o pastor Steve acredita, né, nos grupos pequenos, conhecendo um pouco melhor a cultura americana? Como é que acontece o funcionamento dos grupos pequenos? Como é feita a divisão na igreja Saddleback?
Pastor Steve, why do you believe so much? I think you part of answer this one right now. You know, why you believe so much in small groups? Why is it the passion in your heart? And also, how does the small group happen in your culture? You know, let us understand a little more about your American culture. How does it happen there? The time of the meeting, how long is the meeting, the ideal number of people?
Yeah, so let me, you're right, I alluded to it, but I want to make it crystal clear, is that when God created the church, in the Gospels, we have Jesus' vision and mission, which is summarized in the Great Commission and the Great Commandment. In Acts 2 is where the church was birthed. And the first half of it focused on temple courts. Peter preaches the first sermon, 3,000 people get saved and baptized. And then the last half of Acts 2 is house to house. And part of the normative expression of the church that we see throughout the New Testament, in all the messiness of the letters and the epistles, is we see temple courts and house to house. And we see that repeated over and over again. So why I'm so passionate about it is because it's biblical. What the church has done, wherever it's at globally, is we take a very simple process that Jesus gave us, and somehow we make it very complex.
It's not something new.
Yeah, you're right. And instead of doing the simplicity of the gospel, we tend to miss it. And, you know, in my book, Small Groups with Purpose, I show a funnel. And when you focus on the top half of the funnel, which is weekend services or the class system, that tends to be very head-driven, cognitive-driven. When you focus on just the bottom half of the funnel, which is small groups and individuals, it tends to be very heart-driven. And when God created the church, he didn't create it just one way or the other. He created that temple courts and house to house will work very much together, much like a family unit of a mother and a father. The temple courts and house to house work together in that imagery to help us produce healthy disciples, because both are needed, both the temple courts and the house to house.
Mm-hmm.
And then when you're
about fellowship.
Right. And then when you're talking about just some of the pragmatics of it, is that there you have the formal and the informal side of small groups. The formal side is when you get together to explore God's word. That might be for my small group. We meet Friday from 7 to 9 p.m. And, you know, that's the formal side. But God never created the small group side, the house to house, to be a program. It was more of a lifestyle. And that's why we want our groups to be 24/7. that we our lives are intertwined and people get to know each other. Because to have authentic fellowship where temptation is confessed before sin is confessed, you need a lot of relationship that is happening inside of your small groups. And to apply biblical truths, you need a lot of relationship that's happening inside of small groups. And that can't be done just 2 hours a week for your small group. So you got to think of it in a more organic lifestyle, because the Bible's written on a family system. It's not written on a governmental system, although a lot of our churches are structured like the government, and they tend to be about as effective as the government. They're not structured as a corporate system. We're not making widgets. It's not structured as a military system. We're not trying to conquest. It's not structured as a school system. We're not doing classes and taking time off. It's built as a family system. That's why the highest qualification for a pastor is, can you run your family? Because if you can run your family, you can run God's family, which is the church. And that's why the motifs in the New Testament are parent-child, not teacher-pupil. And so it's when you understand the systems of the church, then you can understand how the Bible made the gospel, made the church, why it made it temple, courts, and house to house. And when you were talking about, a common question, what happens, is that, the pragmatics of what happens when a group meets can be, you have some time to gather and you study God's word, or you watch the video, and then you discuss it and get some life application. And that can be anywhere from an hour and a half to 2 hours, which is important. But again, it's your end in mind is what you're after. Going through curriculum is not the end goal for a small group. It's producing spiritual health of balancing the Great Commission and the Great Commandment in the heart of every person. And when I say balance, I mean it in the terms of a verb of being able to like harmonize them together, like a stew.
Yeah, and what you mean is like you have the formal meeting once a week, maybe, or twice a week, but normally it's once a week. But the small group happens every day through the fellowship of the people. That's something we emphasize here too. Every day the small groups is happening. Any phone call, any message, anytime people gather together, the small group is happening. But they have the formal meeting once a week.
You get together for soccer that your kids are playing. You get together to have a meal. You have a tragedy, or whatever it is. Whenever your lives intersect, small groups are happening.
Ok.
Sendo os grupos pequenos, como ele disse aí, casa em casa, e um estilo de vida, qual tem sido o maior desafio aí da igreja nesse período de pandemia? Como é que a atuação da igreja tem acontecido e qual a tônica e a ênfase da mensagem da igreja, que a mensagem da igreja tem levado?
So, as the church is like the small group being house to house, and during this time of pandemia, the coronavirus, how it has been like the work of the church, and the message the church has given to the people during this time of that we could not gather together.
Yeah, so a lot of our groups have been meeting virtual, very much like what we're doing right here. But this is when, and I truly believe God is making a new wineskin for the church. And we can't be thinking of the questions, when are we going to meet together? When are we going to get together on Sunday? When is our small group going to meet physically? Those are important questions. But what we need to be thinking of is, what does God want us to do? And part of what we've been doing at Saddleback, instead of being a gathering place where we're trying to gather people in our homes and gather people at our church, we're trying to move from a gathering church to a mobilization church, to mobilizing. And part of what we're channeling a lot of our small groups to do is to help take care of the food that is needed in our communities, how to take care of the families that are needed. So the church, what we are doing is pushing everybody to not think so much, when do I get together again to study a curriculum, but how can you go outside during this time and minister to the community wherever it's needed. And in every place around the world, it's going to be a little bit different. But for us, we're ministering strongest in food distribution and helping people take care of the basic needs that they need, along with being able to help families out as schools are starting back up. And so we're doing, we're being what we believe is what I could say.
Mm-hmm. I believe that this time of pandemic, we were very worried when everything started, you know, but praise God for the tools we have, like we have Zoom, we have, you know, other tools we could like relate with people. We can speak to the people, we can take care of the people, even not being able to be together. So that may be a great challenge, but a great opportunity for the church right now.
Yeah, people are so receptive when you're meeting their needs. And we've seen over 8,000 people be led to Christ, not from our weekend services, but being out into the community.
Mm-hmm. The church is just being church, you know.
Ok. Pensando que esse momento a igreja tem que se reinventar, as células estão tendo essa oportunidade de funcionar online. Como é que tem acontecido isso na igreja Saddleback?
So he said this question is almost like the one you just answered, like how has been the opportunity the church and the small groups are really working during this time of pandemic, the great opportunities they are having right now, do you think?
Yeah, I mean, it's inside their own small groups where they're having opportunity to take care of people's needs. But there's also the greater community needs that I was mentioning to you. I mean, when you think in Acts, the latter half of Acts chapter 2, and when you look at the New Testament church, they literally were a body, and they gave to everybody as they had need. And so it is really working together inside your community, where the church can be known not for where you meet, but how you take care of the needs that people have. The church has the greatest volunteer army that anybody has inside their small groups to mobilize people to many different areas around the cities. And that's the beauty of how God created the church, so that we could help take care of the needs. Matter of fact, we've had so many secular places that have been so overwhelmed with how we've been ministering in and where we live, that they're now excited about the church. In the United States, there was a poll done amongst people who don't go to church, and they asked them one question, and that was, what's the one word that you associate with Christians? And the one word that they came up with was judgmental. And how sad that for us here in America, that the church is known more for its judgment than for what Christ created it to be, which was light in a dark area. It doesn't mean you water down the gospel. It doesn't mean you give up any of the values that you have, but you meet people where they are to help move them to where you want them to be. You're never going to win anybody to Jesus that's not your friend. Let that soak in for a second. You're not going to win anybody to Jesus who's not your friend, because there's a simple equation that when you want to speak truth to somebody, it's built on a platform of trust. And trust is only built by spending time with them. And you look at Jesus, he spent time with people so that he could be a trusted source, that when he spoke the truth, they would apply it. That's why the evangelists who stand on the corner and scream, if you don't accept Jesus, you're going to go to hell. That's a truth. But people don't hear it because it's not from a trusted source. You think in a family system. You want your children to apply the truth. The only way they're going to do that if they know the source is trusted. And the only way the trust is built is with time. And so you want to keep building the time with non-believers so that you become trusted, so that when you talk about Jesus, they want to apply it.
So the church is just having the opportunity to be what it was born to be, the ecclesia, the call to outside, you know. And then the people now has the opportunity to get to know what the church really is born for, like the salt and the light of the earth. You know?
And the church gets their own wake-up call to say, were we just about meeting together, or were we about ministering together?
So they got to understand that it's much more than just a meeting. The church is active in the society.
Yes.
That's the truth we learn.
Apenas de forma prática e aplicativa, Pastor Steve, sobre ser uma igreja focada nos propósitos, nos 5 propósitos. Como é isso de forma prática que vocês exercitam aí?
What is it in a very practical way, the 5 purpose driven, the 5 purpose the church is driven? How is it in a practical way?
I mean, kind of like what you're talking about from an individual or a group standpoint.
Tá falando a respeito de indivíduo, de grupo?
Do grupo pequeno, do small group, como grupo, como célula.
Yeah.
Os 5 propósitos dentro da célula, de forma prática.
How to really apply the 5 purpose in the small group in a very practical way.
Yeah. So in my second book, Leading Small Groups with Purpose, which is also in Portuguese, I describe every purpose, and then I give another chapter on ideas on how you do that. But simply put, fellowship, you're trying to spend time together, and you're trying to make memories like you do with a family and like you do with your friends, so that you can spend the time together, so that when you are with each other, you can speak truth to one another. So in the area of fellowship, if a group was brand new, I would want them to do fun things together. I would want them to get to know one another and just build those memories so that they can move towards authentic community. One of the visuals that we use in that is like an iceberg. An iceberg, when you see it in the ocean, about 20% is above the water, 80% is below. And so what you're trying to do is you're trying to say, how do we get below the water surface to really discover who these people are? And when you think of a friendship, the first time you met your friend, your closest friend, you would talk, but you didn't go deep. And what we're wanting to do in fellowship is get conversations to be able to go deep. So you can share when you're happy, you can share when you're sad, you can share when you're frustrated, you can share when your children upset you. I mean, one of the dangers of social media is everybody's family looks perfect. And so what you got to realize is that, you know, in true biblical community, not everything is rosy on the outside. And that's part of fellowship. In discipleship, this is where your curriculum pathway comes in. Discipleship should challenge us to learn about each one of the 5 biblical purposes and help us to learn how to say, not only how do I do biblical fellowship and discipleship and serving and evangelism and worship, how it's outlined in the Bible, but also in the area which is disciple making. So I'll distinguish it between the whole thing, which is disciple making. But when I look at discipleship, you're also learning cognitive values like scripture memory, like reading God's word, like praying, like being able to do solitude. So there's different things that your small group can do in that area when it goes through a curriculum. In the area of serving, it's almost in a 2-part. One is, if this was my small group, I would want to make sure everybody in this circle knew their spiritual gift and was volunteering at the church, because we're a body. And if you're not contributing where you're gifted, the body loses. But also, once everyone knows where they're volunteering at the church, then we can do service projects together to help the church out. In the area of evangelism, part of what we want to be able to do is just be able to say, if this was my small group again, what's the first name of somebody that lives close to you that doesn't know Jesus, that you're praying will come to know Jesus? And when you know those names with everybody, you understand 1 Corinthians chapter 6, verse 3, when you're talking about some plant, some water, but it's the Lord who brings the harvest. So that we can build relationships with people. And so often the church keeps people so busy, they don't know unbelievers. And if you don't know unbelievers, there's no way you're going to have evangelism happening in your church. So we want small groups to foster that. And then in the area of worship, we want groups to focus on how do we have vertical connection through a lot of the things that you could listen to worship together. If your church polity allows it, you could do communion in your small group. You can do some different spiritual exercises in your small group of meditation on God's word. So there's a lot of different things you can do. But that's why it's important in the book you held up at the beginning of this video was chapters 5 through 9. You've got the church has to define what is fellowship, what is discipleship, what is ministry, what is evangelism, what is worship. Because if you don't define it, then your people will define it, and it may not be the way you want it.
So you believe like a health is a small group, and a balanced small group is they have all the 5 purposes in it.
Yeah, they don't do it all the same night, but they over the course of 6 months, you look at how much of each one have you done. And that's where in chapter 10 of Small Groups with Purpose that you held up, we talk about a group plan and an individual health plan, because you want to focus on health, not just knowledge. Because I know a lot of people who know a lot up here, but they don't love people. And sometimes the most problematic people in your church, they know the most, but they just don't know how to love. And 1 Corinthians 13, which has been relegated to weddings, but when you read 1 Corinthians 13, it says, you can fathom all the knowledge of the world, but if you have not love, you're nothing. And that's why it's so important to know when he's talking about all the knowledge of the world, that's biblical knowledge. And so small groups is where you start to apply it. It's easy to learn how to love one another until you really have to do it with each other. It's easy to learn patience until you actually have to be patient. And so that's where the small group is where the application happens in the church.
Amen.
A capacidade, pela experiência dele, essa capacidade de sintetizar os 5 propósitos dentro do grupo foi fantástico. Aí eu já vou para outra pergunta.
Wonderful you being able to summarize all the 5 purpose, talking about small group.
Yeah.
Amazing.
Ok. Falando em discipulado, em discípulos, fazer discípulos, né? Ao invés de ser uma igreja com frequentador ou com membros, como funciona essa questão, ser igreja com discípulos? Como funciona entre eles o processo do discipulado?
How to create a church of disciples, not attendees, and how is the process of discipleship in Saddleback?
Well, in Saddleback, we use the class system to help make disciples. And again, when you understand that the Bible is written on a family system, when you talk to step families, people who have been divorced and remarry somebody else, one of the most difficult things is them trying to figure out their new family system, because 2 family systems are colliding with each other. And it's no different than in the church. You see, in the church, people always ask us, why do you have membership in your church? And because we want to know who's with us And, you know, who's an attender and who wants to be in the Army? You want to know who's working on the cruise liner and who's just sitting around on the lounge chairs. And part of what you have to understand is that when people visit your church, there are three types of people who visit your church. There are people who don't know what the church is, and they're an open book and they're excited to be at your church. There are people who have been in your church for a long time, but they don't know what you're trying to do in your church. If you ask them, you know, what's your church trying to do? They go, I don't know. And then there's the third type of people who are the most dangerous that come to your church. And these are people who come from a different church background. And what they want to do is they want to take their family system and overwrite your family system. And so part of the discipleship process is we have a class system called 101, 201, 301, 401. And in 101, and this is true for you to understand, in every class, you want to give enough content so that they can make an intelligent decision to commit to your church. And so it's important for us to be able to give enough content so they can make a decision on, you know, and sign the covenant that we want them to do, to commit to. And so in class 101, we're helping give our structure, our strategy, our system of our church, our story of our church, and how our church functions, so that, and at the end of 101, people decide, hey, I want to opt into your church. Now, if they don't like our church and how we do church, that's okay. We'll help you find a different church. But we want to know that, do you want to be a part of this church? You opt into it. And in discipleship, we teach them the foundation for their spiritual growth. And in 301, we teach them how to find their spiritual giftedness. And in 401, we help them bring in evangelism and go in mission. And so how you disciple your church is extremely important, but you want to help move them through what we have as concentric circles. We want them to move from the community into the crowd, into the congregation, into the committed, into the core, and being commissioned to do the work of the gospel. So you got to have a strategy in place for how you're thinking developmentally for where your people are to move them to where you want. And if you look at Jesus when he chose his disciples, his first requirement in Matthew 4 was just follow me. 3 years later, it was die for me. And there's a big chasm between follow me and die for me. And part of that's in the church world too, and in any family system. When you're raising your children, you're putting them through the same thing. When they're young, you know, they don't have much responsibility. But what you want to do is, as they grow, you want them to develop them into what your family system wants to produce. And it's no different from the church. But most churches don't have a strategy, a system, and a structure for doing church.
Mm-hmm. Pastor Steve, what about those people who come to become like members of the church? Like they go through this process, you know, the class process, getting to know the church and the vision, the mission.
Yep.
Do the most of the people come through the small groups, or they come through the services?
Both. I mean, when you look at the ethos of your church environment, people are going to come through one of three doors: temple courts, your weekend service, small groups, house to house, or where people are serving God with where they're gifted, which tend to be ministries in your church. And each one produce a different felt need that's being taken care of the way God designed the church. And it's important to understand that all three of those systems, temple courts, house to house, serving God with your giftedness, all of those have to be in alignment so that they're complementing each other, not working against each other, trying to produce your end in mind, which is a disciple, which is balancing the Great Commission and the Great Commandment. So people will come through different doors, but they've all got to understand that they want to be a part of each one. So if somebody comes through an outreach ministry, then the leader of that is saying, you got to get in a small group if you're going to last the long haul. And you've got to hear what our pastor's saying so you understand what our vision is. And if they come through the temple courts door, they're going, you need to get into a small group if you're going to last here at the church or you'll be gone. And then you need to get into the class system because it'll help you find out what you're gifted in this is so you can get into a ministry. And if they come in a small group, you're working to find out, hey, where are these people gifted so they can get into a ministry? And then how can they hear what our pastor's saying so they can know our vision? Because the byproduct of your weekend service gives people a vision that they understand. The byproduct of your small groups is they fill a void that they have spiritually that they lost when the fall of mankind happened. The byproduct of ministries is when they serve with where they're gifted, they feel value. And so when all the systems cooperate, the church is healthy. When the systems don't cooperate, the church is in dis-ease or it's disease. It's kind of like when God created your body, whether you know it or not, you have 9 systems in your body: a circulatory system, a digestive system, a reproductive system, a skeletal system, and 5 more that I forgot. But when one of those systems is not functioning right in harmony with your body, and medical science says your body is in dis-ease or it's diseased, it's sick. And so often in the church, we have the same thing. God created 3 systems: temple courts, house to house, and serving God with where you're gifted. And when the church doesn't realize the systems and how they work together, then the church is sick. And I don't mean sick in a good way.
Yeah, I'm sorry, Pastor Edson. Just one more question. Is that the purpose of Saddleback, to involve everyone in a small group? Like if people get into through the service, and also if they are involved in ministry, does the intention of the church is to involve everybody? Or if some people don't want to be a part of a small group, it's okay, no problem?
No, I mean, so if we had our way and people were robots, you would come to the weekend service, you'd be in a small group, and you'd serve God with where you're gifted. People aren't robots, and so they'll do whatever they want. But our desire is we keep that in front of them, that you got to come to the weekend service, you got to get in a small group. If you do those 2 things, we're going to get you serving, because the class system will help you out, and so will the small group to push you towards that.
Okay. Thank you.
Eu acho que essa pergunta aí é aquela ideia da igreja que estava no templo e de casa em casa, que ele acabou de explicar. Essas 2 coisas são importantes. Agora, vamos mudar um pouquinho de enfoque com ele, Pastor Steve, sobre o desafio de se levantar e de treinar novos líderes. Como que vocês fazem?
We want to just change a little bit the direction. What about the challenge of raising and and training leaders in Saddleback these days, small group leaders?
Yeah, I mean, just like in a family system, you got to have a pathway for them to follow along. And so at Saddleback, I think it's in chapter 13 of Small Groups with Purpose, we have a leadership development pathway that we want our group leaders, when they start out, they're at one place, and we want to take them to a point in time. And it's kind of like when you're raising kids. They start out, but you have a destiny you want them to be 18, 20 years later. And so part of the same thing is in your process for a disciple. And so we start out a new host, and then we realize that we give them new host training, and then we want to get them leader training, and then leader training 2, and then we want to give them continuing education. And most of the continuing education is them applying back what they already know to those who don't know. Because when you teach, the teacher learns the most, not the student. So you have a development pathway for your leaders to be able to go through. And just like in a family system, sometimes you have kids that make you look good, and sometimes you have kids that make you look bad. So not all group leaders are quite as gracious to follow all the rules, but we try to help them along relationally through that process. And that's why I keep telling people all the time, when you understand a family system, then you're going to get the church, because it's so similar in how you raise your kids, how you discipline your kids, how you educate your kids. All of it is done. It's in sync with a family system.
Yeah, and they get mature to have their own family then after they are mature. That's nice.
Pensando numa célula e os 5 têm até se multiplicar, como que vocês trabalham essa multiplicação na célula de Saddleback da igreja de vocês?
The question is, when a group is ready to multiply, when like the leader understand or the church give the small group a time, you know, it's good for them to, during this time, prepare for the multiplication.
So we do this very differently. So I don't want to upset anybody, but let me just explain it like this. If I were visiting Brazil, I wouldn't want to take American idioms and take them with me when I came to Brazil, because I wouldn't be cross-cultural. I wouldn't be sensitive to your culture. So in the same way, when you think of multiplication, in which the Bible is not clear on, by the way, but when you look at multiplication, the principle is evangelism. The methodology usually comes from 1 or 3 birthing places. China, from Yin Kai, T for T training, from Paul Young-E Cho in Seoul, Korea for the cell movement, or from Cesar Castellon through the G12 movement in Bogota, Colombia. And the principle there is basically rapid cell multiplication. You start with one group makes 2 groups, 2 makes 4, 4 makes 8, and multiplication happens. And there's different strategies with each one of those movements. And what I would say is that if that works for your church, oh my goodness, do it. If it works for your church. If it doesn't work for your church, which it tends not to work in America like that, because usually what happens is a group gets together, and this has been my experience. When a group gets together, they grow together, and then you come in and you try to get them to multiply. And in America, they give me 1 or 2 answers. There's no way I'm going to do that, and you can go away. Or they'll say, sure, Pastor, I'll do it, and then they won't do it. And so what I found is I would, and I'm good at sales, and I'm good at motivation. And I found that people just wouldn't do it. And when I came on staff at Saddleback, I thought, oh, I'm at Mecca. So obviously everyone will do this. And they still didn't do it. And then I had to go through and think through, and God gave me this revelation. And I was thinking, when you think, and just like what I've said, the Bible's built on a family system. When you understand that, so many of the reasons why people wouldn't do that make sense. Because there are 5 things in America, and I don't know if they're true in Brazil, but there's 5 things that disrupt the family. 2 primary, 3 secondary. The 2 primary ones that disrupt the family unit are divorce, and in America, over 40% of the people in America have gone through a divorce. In Orange County, where I live, it's 72% divorce rate.
Wow.
So divorce has shattered a lot. The other thing that's shattered the family unit is step families. And in the United States, the 2015 census, in the United States, 57% of children under the age of 18 are being raised in a step family environment. And it's not uncommon where I do a wedding and I have 4 parents on both sides. They're not all sitting in the same row, but there are 4 parents on both sides.
Wow.
Those are the 2 primary things that disrupt the family unit. There's 3 secondary ones that aren't as severe. In America, it's the military system tends to move people around and disrupts the family. Corporate America, when people get jobs, they're moved around, they're moved away from their family system. And then higher education, outside of university. Like my daughter goes to a university, it's a 4-hour plane ride from me. And she's living there now because she met people. So our family unit is disrupted. Now, when you understand that, and then you do small group ministry biblically, where people find authentic fellowship, and they build in discipleship and serving and evangelism and worship, all of a sudden, then you have these people who are experiencing with the Bible, the hole that people have been having that the Bible fills. And then you come along and say, hey, now that you have found biblical community, let's break it up. And it's no wonder people say no. So now we're back to the same problem. The principle is evangelism. What are you going to do with it? And so for us, what we do is we build our groups organically through friendships. And we say you can stay together as long as you like. But one of the things we hold them very highly to in every one of our small groups is you've got to be doing personal evangelism. So our answer is the principle is evangelism. The methodology is high personal evangelism. Because if you don't have personal evangelism happening, then what can happen is your group turns inward. So you can read about that in my book in chapter 8 and in chapter 17. Those 2 chapters are how we handle what you were asking about is multiplication.
Mm-hmm. So, so you have to encourage them. So one question about evangelism is, do you have like a specific moment of the year they go and do evangelism, or the small group, they are always encouraged to do evangelism?
It's a lifestyle.
It's a lifestyle, okay.
So in your small groups, it's not that your group goes out and does an evangelistic activity, or sometimes you can do that. You can bring them over to your house with your small group and watch a sporting event, and don't talk about Jesus and don't talk about church, and let them see Christians that look normal. Mm-hmm. Plenty of time to witness to them. But more importantly, it is just independently. How are you getting to know the people in your communities? How are you getting to know your neighbors? How are you getting to know your work people? How are you getting to develop a friendship? How are you building a bridge that Jesus can walk across?
Thank you.
Ok. A gente já está partindo já para o final dessa conversa tão gostosa com o pastor.
Yeah, we are almost at the end of this so good conversation with Pastor Steve.
Se ele pudesse compartilhar algumas experiências legais que ele viveu já em grupo pequeno, que ele já tem para compartilhar, algumas coisas assim meio inusitadas assim.
Could you share with us some wonderful, interesting experiences you have had in your journey with small groups and some nice experiences?
Oh, I mean, in my own small group, we've been together probably the lifetime of my children. So my children have grown up with all the kids in our small group to know each other and to be with each other. And so part of it is when you have authentic community, when sin comes in, you can confront it and you can work with each other. And that might not look like as a fun happy time. But whenever the gospel wins out over sin, it's a huge victory and a huge win in small group life. But there's the great experiences of iron sharpening iron, when through everyday life, and as your kids are growing up and as you're working together, you can have the experiences and seeing some of your friends and some of your neighbors come to Christ. I mean, there are so many beautiful testimonies that we have of how when you do things God's way, you may not have the big mansion on the street and the nice car, but you have something that money can't buy, and that is happiness through community. And so part of what the beautiful thing about our small group has been is that we have people we can depend on whenever I'm traveling. You guys, our small group comes around my family and helps them out. Whenever they're having need, we do that. You just read through Acts 2:42 through 47, and our small group has experienced that over and over and over again.
Mm-hmm.
Ok, e para a gente ter aí recado final, alguma palavra final do pastor Steve, o que ele poderia dizer para nós, como uma palavra final fechando?
Pastor, our leaders are going to be watching to this conversation, our small group leaders, the leadership of the church. So what would you tell them, the leadership of the church? What message would you share with them?
I would share this with them, and to every one of you that are watching. We had a 19-year-old girl named Marcy start a small group, and she invited her friends into this small group. She wasn't theologically trained, but she was a believer in Jesus, and they would go through the book of John. And in this small group, there was a girl named Nita who came to know Jesus. And when Nita got saved, she went to her mom and back into her house, and she led her mom to the Lord. A little while longer, she led her little brother to the Lord. Then the three of them tag teamed on their father, and their father came to the Lord. Now, her three older brothers were grown up and out of the house, but over time, every one of them, their spouses, and their children came to know the Lord.
Amen.
19 people came to know Jesus because Marcy started a small group. But that's not the best part of the story of what you're doing in your small groups, is that the part why I love that story so much is in this story, I'm the little brother. My destiny got changed from a lady I don't even know. She has no idea what I do for a living. She has no idea what I've done. But the very thing that she started as a 19-year-old decades ago, I'm now teaching on all around the world. And I say to each one of you that are leading a group, you may not think your group means anything, but you are literally destiny changers. And I want to ask you and beg you and pray for you to do the gospel, because you don't know who's in your group. You don't know who's going to be affecting people generations from now. When you're up in heaven, someone's going to come over to you and say, thank you so very much. And you're going to say, I don't know why you're thanking me. And they're going to say, 200 years ago, you led a small group. And in your small group, you led this person to the Lord. And then they led somebody to the Lord. And they led somebody to the Lord. And that person came to know Jesus because of the fruit that you did. And so I'm just telling you that your ministry and what you're doing in your small group, you're changing the destiny of people, because people are on a highway to hell. And if they don't get intervention, they'll land there. And so you are changing the destiny of people like my destiny got changed.
Amen.
That's my prayer for you.